Hello, everyone. So we have a new sound system, better than our old one, right? Thank you all for coming tonight. We have a very nice sized group here for what will be an interesting session, I am sure. We've been chatting for the last couple of years off and on about Deb and Ken's tiny house on wheels, and so we're so happy to have her here. Before we get started, I just want to mention we as in Yvette, we're putting flyers out on our table. For those of you who don't get our newsletter, we'll have some newsletters to pick up and a few flyers of some upcoming things. We have lots going on here, and we'd love you to join us for some of it, all of it, if you can. So, a few words about Deb Peters. Many of you know, I know this because I think some of you are tennis friends, school friends. So Deb is a retired Southampton elementary school teacher, computer teacher, and student council advisor. She is the owner of Mirasol, the tiny famous house on wheels, which is currently planted near Asheville, North Carolina. She has many interests, and I'll tell you what some of those are. Downsizing, a good interest. Writing, cooking, entertaining, reading aloud, biking, swimming, art, photography, chess, Scrabble, tennis, theater, community-supported agriculture, solar energy, the environment, and sustainable living. It's a good thing she's retired. And her newest achievement is becoming a mermaid. She may explain more about that to you. She cares about being there for others, about modeling a sense of adventure, appreciation, and respect, and working to improve her mind, her life, her spirit, the environment, her community, and the world. We are so happy to have her, and we also have her husband, Ken in red, raise your hand, also a retired, longtime Southampton school teacher and administrator, and her daughter, Lena, the tech person in waiting. We hope we don't need her. Anyway, please welcome Deb Peters.
Hi, thank you all for coming. It's a pleasure to see everybody. My purpose for having a tiny house is to try and get other people to become interested.
Oh, it's been a long time. Cafeteria duty, playground duty. The reason that I wanted to go forward with the idea of a tiny house is because I was trying to teach students in Southampton, some of them on free lunch, sitting next to the children who lived in great big mansions, that big isn't always better, and that sometimes small is a way to have a big life and to do good things for the world. And we were a 7 Habits school, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And what we tried to do is teach children to work together and to have goals, to begin with the end in mind and to work toward those goals. And because I was the computer teacher, I didn't have a set curriculum, so I could make it up as I went. And that made my job wonderful, because I always was coming up with weird ideas in the middle of the night, and then I could go to school and bring forth that thought to the children while I was working with them on computers. So I was trying to model for them different ways to have goals, and I would bring up things like, well, ever since I was 12 years old, I wanted to be a mermaid. What would I have to do to be a mermaid? And that was an aside. I did achieve that goal finally this year, 50 years after I first had the idea. The other big thing was the tiny house, and I came across literature in 2007 about, I got an email out of nowhere. I don't know how it came to me, but it was about living tiny, and I fell in love with the concept. And I loved that the houses were beautiful, and they weren't claustrophobic. My house has 10 windows, it has a 13-foot ceiling, and I also like the idea of not constantly buying and collecting. And that's another process on how to downsize and how to let go. So I want to take you through with my slideshow that my daughter helped me put together, my tiny house. It was not originally named Mirasol. It was purchased as Sunflower. But when I got it into a community, a dedicated tiny house community, there was already a sunflower there. And I wasn't going to paint my beautiful yellow house, and I already had people giving me lots of sunflower things. So to honor the memory of my mom, who is Filipino-Italian, I named it Mirasol, which means sunflower in Filipino, and similar in other languages. Okay, so this is the chair that you're going to see later become Ken's bed, because he won't climb into the loft anymore. And this is the beginning. This is Jay Shafer, Tumbleweed Houses. Jay Shafer is the guru. He's the beginning person to start this movement back in the late 1990s. And he was an architect. And it's his design that captured me. Because even though I liked RVs, I never thought they were pretty. Excuse me. But look at the architecture in Jay's work, with the roof and the beautiful porches. So I went to a tiny house workshop, I believe in 2009, 2 days in New York City, and designed my own tiny house. I brought with me the husbands of 2 friends, one who was a cabinet maker. You probably know him. He was also a teacher, Steve Messenger. And I brought Carol Maloney's husband, who worked on sailboats. And I figured those 2 people are meticulous woodworkers. They're going to tell me whether doing a tiny house is plausible. They liked the idea, but neither one of them would let me pay them to build it. They said it would cost the same amount to build it as it would for a big house, because when you think about it, it still has all the windows, it has all the corners. The only thing different is the space in the middle that makes it small, and that's not any of the work. This is one of the many cartoons that my friends have sent to me over the years. It probably is my husband's philosophy too. That's just a story that I wrote to a tiny house blogger, Ethan Walker, and it just tells how my tiny house story went. There I am with my mission statement, which Penny had already started, but that is truly how I feel every time I'm in my tiny house. And it's almost as if it's my baby, and when I'm not with it, I really miss it. And this is me, a little funny, trying to decide with the 7 habits if I'm really going to go forward and do this. Just like I would tell the kids, make a plan and take 1 step at a time until you have achieved your goal. Okay, this is what I found on Facebook. It is $30,000 tiny house called the Sunflower in Zephyr Hills, Florida. Same place where they make the bottled water. And I could not believe my eyes. $30,000 is a really, really good price. I couldn't build it for that amount of money. And there's a website to the right that you can see the link. I went to that website. It was a YouTube, and I must have watched it about 20 times, and I kept screenshotting it and going in and looking at the corners of it and making sure this house was really it. And I had gone with Ken to see probably, 15, 20 tiny houses. And that's after, remember, trying to build my own tiny house. So this has been a long thought out process for me, 10, 12 years in the making at least. That's the loft that you're looking at, and an air conditioner. It's deceiving. When I sit in that loft, my head is about 4 inches from the top if I'm sitting on my mattress. The reason that my nieces are in here, my great niece and grandniece, nephews, is because people kept saying to me, what are you going to do with a tiny house? So I have all kinds of ideas. I have like 50 thoughts. One of them was to be a giant chess tiny house, and I thought I could park it in Delray or in Southampton, and I could teach chess. I could have little boards inside and teach kids how to play. I could have computer chess set up, and I could have my giant chessboard with the big pieces outside. I also thought of using it as a church to marry people, because I was an officiant at one time. I'm not very successful. Some of those weddings never come to fruition. And I also thought of it as a reading corner, or to teach kids math facts. I had all kinds of ideas, but I was going to get that tiny house. Now, I took a trip with Ken to Zephyr Hills, Florida, which is on the west coast. And there is Cy. There's Ken and I in the loft, having climbed up that ladder. See how our heads are really very close, and that's not sitting on a mattress. On the right is me signing the contract to buy the tiny house. I used a good portion of my retirement savings for that. He gave me a shirt, and there's my tiny house on the right. This is the garage. That little square is what you call the garage. You see that it's sitting on a trailer, 2 wheels. They're covered in white right now, especially down in Florida where it was built. You have to really worry about the sunshine degrading the rubber of the tires. Air conditioner is above the garage in that peak, and I'll explain more about that later. Okay, now, that closet, that's where everything you own for clothing should go. So you can hang some things up, and then you have 4 drawers. However, that top drawer, most of the clothes fall down into the top drawer, so that one's really useless. What I do, and I'm still trying to do, is limit my clothing. I'm trying to pare down to 100 items. So that's why David sees me in the same tennis outfit almost every time. I do wash them. This is one of those little black dresses that gets worn for everything and can be squashed up. And so it goes to weddings, it goes to funerals, it goes to presentations, and I change things up with scarves. You can't have a lot of clothes. This is a full kitchen. It's a 3-burner stove, and there's an oven in front of it. There are 2 slides, so that's the left and then the right. The sink is full. That is a beautiful wood countertop, and also wooden floors. You do have to have a fan over your stove because it's such a tiny house that the smells and the humidity builds up really quickly. On the right-hand side is the cork wall that has made such an impression for, I'm not much of a drinker, but those are all corks. The person who did build the tiny house, Cy Inglet, he was using his own corks, but then he couldn't drink fast enough, so he ended up buying the rest. When you buy a tiny house or build a tiny house, one of the most important things to do is think about what is important to you, because you have to try and make your tiny house geared toward your needs. Not what everybody else has, but what's important to you. And to always downsize. Now, the refrigerator
refrigerator. So,
You have to have a lot of fresh food, and you have to be thoughtful in how you're storing things in your refrigerator. Because part of that refrigerator is also the freezer. So I make mini ice cubes. Let me back up one straight toward the back. That's the bathroom. There's a pocket door past the sink. You can see like yellow. I'll go get more to that later. Okay, this is the house when it was empty. So take a good look to the left and right of the center red. That's the window covered with curtains. Those are shelves, but the shelves are really thin. So you can't stick any book in there. You have to be really mindful. And one of my thoughts someday is to write books, but I want my books to be the thickness of a ladder so that they could all be the right size to fit on a step of a ladder. There's the loft from the kitchen. You're really seeing it from my living room. This is my cousin Joyce and I. She came and met me in Florida on the West Coast and we camped overnight in the tiny house before I had it driven away. And the reason it was so important to me that Joyce see this, she was my baby cousin, and when I was growing up, her parents built her the most beautiful playhouse that I always wanted to live in, and I think that may be the beginning of me loving tiny houses. Okay, this is important on the left. I need that piece of paper to tell me how to hook up my batteries to make the electric work. This is Cy and the guy Rob, who drove my tiny house on 2 different occasions, one across the state of Florida and once up to North Carolina. It's a lot of work that goes into the moving of it. So people often ask me, oh, do you just drive everywhere? Tiny houses are not like RVs. They are not meant to be driven at your whim. They are relocatable, but I don't feel comfortable driving a 10,000-pound big bulky thing like that. So I hire someone. The first time it cost me $800 to bring it across the state and bringing it up to North Carolina from Florida. That cost me $1,500. The guy was not charging me enough. He ended up going out of business. But he was meticulous and fantastic. And this is all the work in preparing the tiny house for its move. You can see that the windows that would be getting all of the wind have cardboard on them. The air conditioner has cardboard on it to protect them. The door that goes over my little tiny garage, that had to be removed and carried in the truck. The black steps, they were my original steps up into my house. Okay, here we are. He built this house in a trailer community, and he was living with his mom at the time, and the neighbor was so close to him that that house was packed in between the 2 yards, and all of a sudden the friend, the neighbor, sold his house, and now there was someone new living in the house who didn't want a tiny house there because they're not legal in most places. Okay, we're saying goodbye, and there he is watching his tiny house go off. That was his baby. He built it from scratch. He always thought he would keep it for himself. His dream was to travel across the country, and he discovered he built it so well, so sturdy. It's built like a real house, a stick house. He wouldn't be able to bring it through the mountains. Okay, so we're on the road. I really was following this, and I took all these pictures as I was following the tiny house. And I couldn't believe how it looked with the cars. I was so excited. I had that gigantic smile on me. So I brought it to Delray Beach, Florida. That's where Ken and I live for half the year. And I could not find any place to keep my tiny house. No trailer parks wanted me because I was not like everything else. I didn't look like the rest of the homes, or I was too short. or I was too yellow, so no one would accept me. I like these pictures because one shows an RV on the left and the other is some kind of big truck, and I just thought, see how thin the tiny house is? It's 8.5 feet wide, and you want it to be on a standard trailer, but if you ever do build a tiny house, you must make sure that the trailer is really sound, because that's what the entire thing is built on. So Ken and I had gone to look at a bunch of trailers. We found one really nice tiny house up in Massachusetts, and I loved the inside of it, but then when I was examining the trailer and then calling up my cousin who's a fireman, and he said, no, don't go for it, it's a piece of junk. So the house itself was beautiful, but it was sitting on a rickety old trailer, so I couldn't get it. Okay, this is me still following my tiny house. And eventually I get my tiny house. This was accidental that I even found this from talking to a friend. This is a place that stores anything on wheels. And it was in bike riding distance from where we live in Delray Beach, Florida. So I put it in there. The gentleman who ran the place was really, really nice. The guy, Rob, unhooked the house from the truck for me. He undid all the cardboard. That picture, oops. That's the kind of truck that you really have to have a Super Duty truck. You can't like pull it in an HRV. Okay, that's my garage. So he's in the garage and he's going to put the batteries back in there so I have electric. And they're 2-car batteries. I could have solar. And one day I plan to have solar. It's all set and ready for it, but not yet. Okay, now this ended up being a problem. That's my old van that I love. I wanted to live in my van at one point, and I tried to for a weekend. See how the windows open up to the side? That's really important if you do tiny houses. You can't have windows that go up and down. The place is so small, you really need to have the windows open often, even if it's raining. And those kinds of windows allow for you to have the window open and the rain doesn't go in. One of the problems with my tiny house is it was pushed up to a building, and I ended up getting dry rot because the guy who ran the tiny house with the store everything on wheels place was trying to protect my tiny house from storms and hurricanes, and he put my tiny house right up against the building, and so it never got sunshine, and the rain would come in, and that ended up causing dry rot that I had to get fixed eventually. Okay, I love that view. See, the white wheels are covered in the Florida sun. My old step, which will soon be replaced. This is the bare minimum in my tiny house. That's my loft before it had a mattress in it. Really hard sleeping on that floor, but a few times I'd say to Ken, I really want to stay in my tiny house, so he would stay at the regular house and I'd be riding my bicycle down there and stay in that trail, that store everything on wheels place overnight. My parents had bought me a little tiny porta potty. Okay, there are Ken's son and daughter-in-law and the twins up in the loft. Everybody would come to visit. So remember, one of my goals was for people to learn about tiny houses. When I started and tried to investigate places on Long Island, down in Florida, many upstate New York, where can I put my tiny house? I wanted to buy land and I wanted to put my tiny house there. Nobody wants a tiny house next to their property because zoning wants things big. Bigger is better in everybody's mind. It's more money. So I have a beautiful house, but because it's small, nobody would let me put it anywhere. And when I started, nobody knew what a tiny house was. So when I was talking about this in 2007, 2008, there was not only no place to put it, nobody to go to because nobody understood what I was even talking about. So I feel like I've at least enlightened people to know that tiny houses exist. And then a few years after that, the programs on TV started also bringing things to light. My cousin's coming and helping to put a gutter in. How do you like that little tiny gutter? You have to balance the tiny house. Oops. When you balance, you have to use those shims so that you can keep everything sturdy, because otherwise when you're in the tiny house, for example, the pocket door to the bathroom can just slide open on its own if you're not balanced. That's just one example. Okay, this is what Ken bought me for a housewarming present. It's the minimal bed that can be a lounger, it can be a chair, and it can be a very comfortable bed that both of us can lie on and watch TV. I go up in the loft to sleep and he sleeps on that. Quite comfortable, right, Ken?
Absolutely.
Okay, and this is, I started putting my tiny house in an Airbnb type program, so I had to give directions on the website on how to fold it up and put the legs in. This is my biking crew from Delray Beach, Florida, and we were talking about sustainability, and a lot of the bikers are into not using their cars, trying to bike everywhere that they can, and they took a bike club ride down to my tiny house. Everybody hung out inside, parked their bikes outside, and after they left, I stayed. Now, we were still in that storage unit place, and I stayed overnight. I called Ken and said, I really want to stay, and I had brought food, so I cooked my egg. Can you see how tiny that little frying pan is? And I have that little teapot, and when you're doing things tiny, you have to try and keep everything small. Like even when I do buy something, I make sure, I don't wear jeans, they take up too much room, so I wear like leggings. And I always dress in layers to keep warm or cold. I have little tiny, like Chinese teacups instead of a lot of big mugs.
There are 8 people in that room.
Oh yeah. They couldn't move around very much.
That's all right.
The stove works really well. It's gas, and I do have to occasionally change my propane tank. I have 2 propane tanks, and when one is low, then I switch it over to the other, and that's in that little garage where I said the batteries are. And I have real china, real silverware, cloth napkins, and that's a placemat from Vienna. And do you see the toast and butter are sitting on a red and white? That's a cloth paper towel my daughter bought me for Christmas one year. A whole roll of paper towels that I reuse over and over and wash. So the whole idea is to try and be as sustainable as possible. That's me staying in the storage unit at night, so I went outside to take a picture. More friends. So many people visited this tiny house. The one with the green around her neck, her name is Charlie. She hated it. She could not wait to get out of that building. She could not stand it. This is my friend. She's in white and black in a red pocketbook. She's 93 years old. Her boyfriend's 83 years old. And I used to play tennis with them every single day. So everybody was going to visit my tiny house. More friends. This woman up in the loft, she wants to live in my tiny house, and she wants to go all the time. She keeps saying, let's go to your tiny house and stay there. She grew up with her dad having designed the Airstream that was used for NASA. So she comes from a tiny house background. More friends. That's my daughter Lena, her boyfriend. And to the right, that's not Lena, that's my other daughter Johanna, who's a science teacher, and we'll talk more about that later because she was teaching environmental studies, and she did a whole unit and culminated the environmental studies unit with my tiny house with a Facebook chat. Okay, it shows you the tiny house table, which folds down and up on the left, can be used for eating, and later on I'll show you that it can be used for other things, but it collapses down so you have more space. That black chair in the background, that's my housewarming present from my parents, because that also folds down. And the table on the right that the girls are playing cards at, that folds down also, and that often goes out onto my deck, which you haven't seen yet. There's my parents and my cousins and my high school class reunion crew. Okay, my parents, my father saying, "Oh my God, get me out of here." He's 6'2", about 250 pounds. There is the bed, lounger, chair on the right, used in all different ways. And that table is a second table that also folds up and down. Okay, it doesn't look like much, but this is a really important chart. And my daughter Johanna is a science teacher in Philadelphia, and she each year did a unit on the environment and on how much CO2 is used. So on the left is the average house versus a tiny house. For example, the US accounts for 77% in the United States. Buildings account for 77% of the total electricity used. The average house, 2,598 SF. What's SF, Doug? Oh, square foot. I thought it was an electricity question, that's why I was asking Doug. Okay, so on the right, an average tiny house, 186 square feet. Okay, and how many logs? That's a logging truck on the left. You have 7 logging trucks compared to, on the right, 1. The amount, go to the right-hand side, the CO2 in our environment, the average house versus a tiny house. So for electricity, 12,773 kilowatt hours versus a tiny house, 914 kilowatt hours. Heating, 8,000 pounds of CO2 per year, a tiny house, 558 pounds of CO2. Cooling, 4,000 pounds versus 206 pounds, is that what that says? 86. And there's a big difference in CO2. So the neat part of this project was Johanna would do a couple of weeks on sustainability and the environment and have them talk about tiny houses. And then I would go down, this is still at the storage unit, and I would stay in the storage unit in my tiny house. She would FaceTime me. Her class would see me on a big screen like this. I was on my little cell phone, my iPhone, and they would interview me. And I would also take them for a tour of the tiny house. And I would flip it back and forth for them, looking at me, looking at the tiny house. I don't know if they were more excited about the tiny house or that their teacher had a mother. But it was always very, very successful. More people. On the left, I was trying to figure out what do you do for privacy. So I took some Soji screens and I put the Soji screen up across the loft, trying to figure out privacy. There's Trudy on the right, Martha, a whole bunch of people. This is now Rob trying to connect the tiny house to his truck. And it is not just a matter of, oh, stick the thing on there and go. He had all kinds of things to calibrate and calculate and get it just so, because these tiny houses don't travel nicely like an RV. You know, their RVs are light and aerodynamic, made to travel on the road. A tiny house, a nice tiny house, is made to look beautiful, to make you love it. It's not really meant to drive. The reason they put it on wheels was, Shafer put it on wheels, was to get around the zoning laws. If it was on wheels, you could go under the wire, but now that's not true anymore. Is Ken helping out? Okay, this is now my tiny house leaving the storage unit because I've given up keeping it in Florida. I tried really hard and there was just no place to put it that was acceptable to me. One place was on the West Coast, but they had only taken one tiny house and I didn't even know if they could take it. And one place up in Orlando that was not acceptable. So I drove it, I had it driven by Rob again, to Flat Rock, North Carolina, which is just outside Asheville. So that's me on the other side. I'm still inside the gate. This time I don't follow the tiny house all the way up to North Carolina. So that's me saying goodbye to it. I'm in my car and saying, oh my gosh, he's going by himself. Okay, so it is a 10-hour ride, 717 miles, and the tiny house was delivered to Flat Rock, North Carolina in 2016. How am I doing with time? Am I right? Okay. I put this up here because I never understand where anything is. So the dot on the top of the very right is blue, that's New York. Florida is where I lived half the time, and where it says Tennessee, North Carolina, Tennessee is only 45 minutes from my house in Flat Rock, my tiny house. So I'm really close to South Carolina, to Tennessee, and even to Kentucky, and it's in the mountains. Now the problem is my house was built for, oops, let me go back. My house was built for a Florida address. It didn't have insulation in the floor. It had air conditioner that you had seen in the back above the garage. It didn't have any heat. And that became a problem because I was relocating to the mountains. When I started in this new place, Lisa, raise your hand, Lisa, my friend Lisa from school, she and I used to talk about tiny houses all the time because we're both addicted to them. And she found me this location, and it was originally called the Village of Wildflowers, which was just like so cool a name for us. But they've since changed it to Simple Life Village. And where that star is, that's where my tiny house is. It's around a lake. Usually I say in Florida a fake lake, but this one's a real pond. And there, if you go to the top right, there's a pool, a clubhouse, and lots of tiny houses. Now, where the star is, and all those little orange ones, those are truly tiny, tiny houses on wheels. They're called THOWs, T-H-O-W, tiny house on wheels. The ones that you see around all the trees, toward the middle and the upper, they're more like 350 square feet, so triple the size of mine. And they're on their wheels, but they're not really made to go. They're trucked in and they're set. And this tiny house village is pretty much a lot of single women, retired professional women who want a place to live that is affordable, where they kind of feel safe. That, you know, some of us, you hear the kids talk, they want to be like out in the woods, and they want to be all alone. Well, as you get older and older, you don't really want to be alone. You want your privacy, but if something happens, you want to have people around you. So these tiny house communities fill that need. The other thing that's really nice about the tiny house community is the shared amenities. Just like the over 55 communities in Florida, my tiny house community has a pool. It has a yoga studio. They talk about getting a massage therapist in. They have a beautiful fireplace that looks like a place in Vermont. So it's got a fire pit for people to sit around. And they talk about shared, they haven't done this yet, but shared driving, things like that. There we are. This is when we first put the tiny house in Flat Rock. Notice there were vests not in Florida anymore. Those are the business cards that I put over to the right. Some of you took them with the little address book. That address book is repurposed. That was my dad's business many years ago, and I said, I'm going to use these for something. So you can put all your passwords in there for your email things. So if you do want to look at the tiny houses, you can go to WNCMountainRentals.com. That's the company that I put my tiny house with when I'm not living in it. So I had a woman who just lived there for 6 weeks. She loved it. Her daughter was at camp. She needed a place to stay while her daughter was at camp because she was going to work there part-time, and she had a gigantic dog. So dogs are always welcome in tiny houses, and my community even has a small dog park and a big dog park. And I welcome dogs into my house. They can't go up in my loft, but I don't know how many of them could ever climb that ladder anyway. So there's my house, and now do you see there's a deck on it? And I just love where this is. It's beautiful. That's the fire pit in the background. This is not my pond, that's a different pond, the bigger one, and it's aerated. That arrow is pointing to my heater. It's a Mitsubishi mini split, so I have central air and heat in my tiny house, and that's the plumber on the right hooking that stuff all up. I guess he's a plumber, I'm not sure. They had to drill a hole, which had me very upset, but that's what they had to do, and then they had to make the whole thing connect on the outside. So now that air conditioner that's above is no longer needed. So I have to eventually get that out, and I'm going to replace it with stained glass. And there's Lisa. She made me my Mirasol sign as my name changed. Thank you, Lisa, with her cricket. And this is my tiny house deck that Raffaella and Steve Messenger built. Raffaella did a good part of the designing, and Steve, the cabinet maker teacher, he did all the work on it. And it's a really unique design. It's an 8x8 deck, and it's got a ramp because I think that every house should be handicap accessible. So I made sure that there are no more steps. The seating is built in and it comes off. There's Raffaella and Steve. This is after they built the deck. The seating is off the 8 feet. So it's an 8-foot deck, but the benches are kind of floating out there, even though they're very, what's that? Thank you. Say that word again. Cantilevered. He did say that to me. And those are my portable chairs and my fold-up table. Okay, see those beautiful cushions? They're a big mistake, and I'll tell you about that. Can you just guess why they're a mistake? Where the heck am I going to put them when they're not on the porch? I have a tiny house. I don't have an attic. I don't have a basement. I don't have a closet except for my little clothes closet. That's the view. I was able to stain my deck in about an hour and a half. Raffaella and Steve built their own deck. They have a house about 20 minutes from there. She was staining for days. So I invited her over and another friend who lives in the area for dinner. So this is that I can cook in my tiny house. This is the meal that I prepared, and it is, some people might think that looks awfully busy, but that's everything that I need to live comfortably, and I love to entertain, so it's all there in my tiny house. There's my wine bar, except I pretty much drink Pellegrino. And there we all are. So I took my portable tables from inside, put them out on the deck, took my tablecloths. I don't know if any of you have noticed, but plates nowadays and wine glasses and mugs, they're gigantic. Do you realize that they've oversized everything? It's like ridiculous. Look at the size of those plates. I bought them from a friend. She was getting rid of them at an estate sale for her parents. They're probably 2/3 the size of a regular dinner plate. I think that's why we eat differently now, because the plates are bigger. We drink differently. The wine glasses are like 4 times the size of the little wine glass I got when I got married. The first time. Is that? How many times? Typical black dress. My friend got me those little glasses. So even though I have big glasses, they're really tiny and they fit on my shelf. Cloth napkins. I have to multi-purpose things, so I don't have beer steins, so use the champagne glasses. Okay, here's the problem with those terrible cushions. Where the heck am I putting them? I tried putting them over my nice simple gray chair, and there's also a feather bed in there. Eventually, my younger daughter, not Lena, she's too sweet to say anything, but Johanna, my one who tells the truth, says, "Mommy, get rid of all that stuff. You're cluttering up your tiny house." So I got rid of almost all the cushions. I got rid of the feather bed. See how we're trying to use the cushions? It doesn't work. You can't clutter things. You just make it worse. The table goes down. I can do yoga. There's me trying to cover up my gray, beautiful, minimalist couch with a feather bed. It's gone now. I taught chess to 500 kids a year, every year for almost 30 years. That's why you see chess all over the place. The flower, there's really only one. I just put it in every picture. That's up in the loft. I know that it looks really big, but you cannot stand up in there. You can't even kneel. There's my first mermaid. So even though you can't have a lot of big stuff, I still have a mermaid hanging as a little thing from my lamp. To the right, that's a chessboard that's still in the house up here, but it will eventually be, not chess, I'm sorry, Scrabble. That's my other fun thing to do. So it hangs on the wall, doesn't take up any room, doesn't need to be stored, can also be used for messages. This is a message for anybody who rents my tiny house. So this is like in the Airbnb thing, that you have to hook into that bar and come out. Climbing it is a little bit of a task. Many people nowadays are trying to put stairs, but they take up so much room. Do you see to the right, there are now metal safety guards. Those are there because the insurance company wouldn't let me have insurance. And I had to go with Lloyd's of London. Nobody else would insure me. That's an egress from the top. There's my shower and a tiny little sink. This is Saracopa Organic Coffee House in Riverhead. It's a really wonderful place, but the reason I took this picture is that's a ladder. It's their shelf. But I thought that is really cool. And to the right, I'm not sure where it is, I think it might be greased, but that's the stained glass that I want to replace, the typical look that I want to replace that air conditioner. Okay, there's the cork close up. These are some things that you really have to make sure you have on call. A plumber, the HVAC guy, the electrician, a towing service. You never know when there's going to be flooding. And so I have money already sent to the towing company that they'll get my house out of danger if necessary. This is Cy is the guy who built my tiny house. This is what he went to. That is called a gypsy, and he can travel anywhere with that. And it is so cool inside. This is me trying to hang things out. You're not allowed to do that in my community, so in most communities, you're not allowed to use a clothesline anymore. It's so ridiculous. This picture is here because a bus load from a church were driving around, and they all got out. That bus was filled up with people. they wanted to see my tiny house, so I invited them all in. There were about 15 of them, and they just like traipsed through, left me messages, so it was to me spreading the word about tiny houses. This is some of the problems. Okay, I was having some kind of rot and bugs to the entrance of my tiny house, so I had to have that taken care of. That's an on-demand heater, and it works great, gives you all the hot water you want for a shower, but in the winter it was causing problems because I'm in the mountains and it freezes up there. And remember, this was made for Florida, so I had to have that taken care of. And I had a great solution. The guy who built my tiny house, Cy, he loved it and he missed it, and he knew that house better than anybody, so is it time to stop, Penny? A few more minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. He came up and he made all the repairs for me in exchange for living in the tiny house for a couple of weeks. There's that dry rot that I was talking about. That got repaired. There's the bed. All that carpeting, I got rid of all of that. That made too much clutter. All of those pillows I got rid of. I'm going to have to paint that because that silver stuff on the corners I don't like. Okay, this is somebody else's tiny house. This is a hoarder who decided the only way she was going to solve her problem was to go tiny. So she got rid of all of her stuff that she could bear to part with. This house is a tiny house. It's too cluttered for me. I think she's got her problem in her little house too. But if you wanted to find out about her, do you see in the bottom left, tiny house, giant journey? The woman is Jen, who does a blog. It's one of the best blogs I've ever seen. And if you're interested in getting any more information, the cards that you took, my little business card, you can find my email address and just ask me for more information or questions, and I'll be happy to help you. This is another tiny house, more like a 350 square foot. Isn't it gorgeous? And those have stairs going up. Washers and dryers, I don't have one in my tiny house, but I would say that that is what people want the most. You don't really need to have a dishwasher, and they take up a similar amount of space, but everybody wants a washer dryer, or at least the washer. This is a Murphy bed in somebody else's house, just something that I love the idea of. It pulls down. There's Jenna, she's the blogger for Tiny House Giant Journey, and I am going to read what she wrote because it's so important. Hi, I'm Jenna. Not too long ago I was working full-time at a job I hated just to pay the rent. Then one day I decided to change my life. I downsized, built a tiny house, she built it herself, and found freedom. Now I'm a full-time happiness addict with the freedom to travel the world, a part-time job, and I'm never turning back. So far I've visited 28 countries around the globe. Building a home on wheels and becoming financially secure has taken me farther than I ever imagined possible. I hope my blog inspires you to follow your own journey to happiness. So if you're interested in finding out more, I would definitely just Google Tiny House Giant Journey, and you'll find she has a million YouTubes, and this is one of them. I know this woman from Tiny House people end up knowing each other all around the country. So this is Shorty Robbins. She's a grandma, and she is really into what do you call that, when Victorian era reenacting the Civil War. And they built this tiny house just for the outside, and she built it for a reenactment scene. And she ended up deciding, I'm living in a tiny house forever. And she really likes sewing and the piano. So she is sitting at her piano bed, and in the old days, those were very common before Murphy beds. And you pull out the piano, and now you slept in there. And the adults slept in the parlor where that was. And then up in the loft is where the kids used to sleep. So when her granddaughter comes, the granddaughter goes up in the loft. She never climbs up in the loft. That also is from the Tiny House Giant Journey blog. Okay, there's Lisa. Lisa built herself a she shed. A she shed is when it's on your own property, and usually that is legal because it's yours on your own property, and that's how you can get around it. The other thing that is typically legal, is getting to be more commonplace, is a granny shed, okay? And that's because you're building typically on your kid's property. So who knows, Lena, maybe one day I'll just drive mine up to your place. There's Lisa and I hanging out.
There's a she shed commercial on television.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, there is. So is burning.
Well, Lisa's a librarian at the elementary school, so sometimes it's a library and sometimes it's a lounge. And there's Lisa's daughter. This is our house in Southampton, and I left this picture in here because that's where I wanted to put my tiny house, on that property, in North Sea, Ken's property. But it's not legal at all there. So I'm just gonna look at my beautiful roses. This is my tiny house before it was yellow. It's an albino. I like it yellow. And this is my daughter Lena's work, and I'm going to pretty much end with this. Turn off your lights and turn on your green. Do your part to try and be sustainable. Thank you.
Does anybody have, go over by the microphone. You want to take a few questions?
I'll take a few questions. I know we have to get, yes.
Well, you said that it was not legal to put it there on your friend's property. But people have sheds, so what, is it the electricity? I mean, if it's self-contained.
It's mostly to do with the sewer.
Okay.
So that's a big part of it. And the other part is if you're trying to make money and rent it out, that's a big issue.
But if it's self-contained, like if you have a...
Compostable toilet?
Yes.
Yeah.
So is that then, would that...
It's still illegal right now on Long Island.
Really, on Long Island, because there's the tiny house builders, right, in Yaphank.
The way they get around it here on Long Island, especially out here in the east, is people take their tiny house and they use it while they're building their big mansion, and then they turn it into their pool house.
They call it a pool house.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Any other questions?
What is it hooked up to? What?
My tiny house is hooked up with electricity. That is just like I could put it, say I could put it at Ken's house, and I could just run electricity from the main house into the tiny house. It's not a standard plug though. It's one of those plugs that's like for an RV. It's round. And then the sewer in my house in Flat Rock is hooked up to the city sewer. So it would have to go into a cesspool, which is really not legal to do. And then the water, you can take a garden hose and hook that up. Not that I would do that, but you... In Flat Rock, it is hooked up to a special hose that I bought at Sam... What's that RV place? Sam's Life, Sam Goody, Sam something. Yes.
What does that community charge you by year? Or
Good question. When I started 3 years ago, it was $450, and now the rent is $550 just to rent the lot that I put my own house on. $550 a month, which is why I have to have it in an Airbnb to get. I don't make any money on it, but I made $5,000 last year renting it out, and that's just breaking even barely. But that does include maintenance. It includes cleanup and snow removal. It includes the pool up at the clubhouse and the fire pit and the yoga studio, and it also includes garbage pickup and electric, basic cable. So it's $550 covers everything except Wi-Fi. But I can go up to the clubhouse and use Wi-Fi.
And is there parking space for your car near your house or a big?
Plenty of parking for, well, I shouldn't say plenty. There's parking for 2 cars by my spot. Okay, any other questions? Yes?
For bad weather, or how many times have you had to move yours?
I've only moved it twice, and I moved it from west coast of Florida to the east coast, and then I moved it up to Flat Rock, North Carolina.
So for hurricane warning or something?
Supposedly, my tiny house is much more sturdy than, and I believe it is, more sturdy than an RV and a trailer park, and the park model homes, but I would still strap it down the way they do to the RVs. You know, you have to get big fat straps and they hook to the ground. Yeah.
I
One
was
more
just going to
question.
ask, I know this might defeat the purpose, but could you have gotten one of those Rubbermaid containers and put it like right in your driveway there for like storage or?
I have thought about that, but number one, the community doesn't like that, and number two, I will do that during the season for something like my little Weber grill, but you really need to get everything inside to keep it safe. Thank you. Thank you all very much.